All right, welcome back to the Dreamer Boy podcast.
Here we are. I'm back.
Catherine Clark is back on the show. Okay.
That's right.
We had you on, I think it was episode 3, because Connor and I did part 1, part 2. Mm-hmm. But you were my second guest.
Second guest.
And, you know, my mom called me out the other day. She's like, you keep saying at the end of your episodes that you'll have him back on, but when are you going to have him back on? And here,
Nancy's just got my back.
She's got your back. But here we are. We're back. Catherine Clark is in the house. A lot of you guys know that over the last month, I've been mobile with my podcast.
You've been traveling a lot.
The whole month of June, I was only in Kansas City for 2 days, both for birthdays, birthday parties. That's the only thing I came back for.
Right.
Because I was what a homeless man once told me. Home free. I was home free.
Home free.
Yeah, he didn't like homeless. He liked home free.
Got it.
But anyways, I've been home free for the whole month of June. Right now, I am living with a friend of mine. But all that being said, podcast is mobile.
Yes.
So we're here at your apartment.
This is my place.
We got, you went all out for us today.
I did a little something special.
For everybody who is watching the video, which this will be up on YouTube, everyone check it out. We got a little Dreamer Boy podcast, little letterboard right here for those who are listening. It's too bad you don't see it, but
shout out to Kelsey, my old roomie, for giving me that letterboard.
Wow. Kelsey Simpson. We love her.
We love her.
I wonder if she listens to the show.
I think she does.
Wow.
We'll see after this, if she says anything.
So this episode, Catherine and I have known we were going to do this episode for the last few days, and we've been talking about it.
Yeah.
And we both have been so excited.
So excited.
And I've started to tell people, because we know what we're going to talk about, obviously. I've started to tell people that I think this is going to be the best Dreamer Boy podcast episode yet.
Wow. You're setting it up.
I am setting it up. And I am not afraid. So if you're just like fishing around for an episode, you're like, oh, which one should I listen to?
This is the one.
This is the one to listen to right here. Because I believe this is about to be the best episode that I've shot yet. And that's saying something.
Wow.
Right?
You've had some great episodes.
I like some of the episodes that I've done. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Some more than others. And I won't say which ones. I'm just kidding. No, it's been awesome. I've got to have... I guess I've done 10 episodes so far. I think this is number 11, as long as I put it out in order.
Yeah, we'll
Which
see.
I don't always. I stopped having to say, like, this is episode 8, this is episode 9, because I stopped putting them in the right order. But the first sort of 10 episodes, I was traveling around a lot and seeing people who I hadn't seen in a while. And
such a spectrum of topics, like all over the board with just... Like your podcast is Jesus people telling Jesus stories to produce a greater love for Jesus. And all the stories have been different. Everything has been about different things. So yeah, I've loved it.
I've enjoyed that too, getting different flavors on the show and different people on this sort of spectrum of just different streams.
Yeah.
And so some charismatic friends, some not, some operating in different Holy Spirit gifts, some not. And it's just like, man, I've loved getting to introduce my listeners to these different ones.
Right.
Because I have some, listeners from kind of each different stream.
Yeah. You have diverse friends, for sure.
It is.
But I think that's what the Lord is doing actually in the body of Christ, is bringing people together to have conversations like this.
Absolutely.
About different topics from different backgrounds. So I love that you're doing that on your podcast, for sure.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you back. So we've got 2 major, big announcements.
Big announcements.
One from me and one from Catherine.
Right.
And I think the way I want to do this is I want to make my announcement and then we dive into it. And then halfway through the show, we'll make your announcement.
Okay.
And then we'll just be able to dive all into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we'll give each person their sort of like their moment or whatever.
Okay.
You like that?
I love it.
Okay. My big announcement
Let's hear it. What is it?
I am moving to Dallas.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Wow, I just said it.
You said it, and it's going to be out there.
Man,
official.
it started to sort of like squeeze out, a little bit here, a little bit there, and people are kind of finding out. And I've been trying to hold it back because it's quite a story, actually.
Yeah.
And we're going to take you through that story in just a minute. But yeah, it's like, it doesn't feel right saying it flippantly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel right being like, because I have so many emotions with it.
Yeah.
And yet I really believe that this is where the Lord is leading me.
And once you say it, it kind of becomes more real.
That's
too.
right. That's
you're
right.
You're taking something that was just yours or just between you and the Lord, and you're putting it out there for everybody.
Absolutely.
So
it's vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's this thing in the back of your mind too that it's like, well, what if
it doesn't?
It like actually doesn't work out and come through. And that's actually super relevant to this podcast show because that ties into what we're going to talk about. But
so how did this first come about? Like, when did you first start thinking of this?
Well, so let me just take you down, basically tell you the story of the month of June.
Okay.
But I'm going to go back just a little bit further to give you a little bit of context. So here is the story that goes with the big announcement that I am moving to Dallas. So how did this come about?
Yeah.
Well, it was about midway through April that we were having a Bible study with our friendship group. We meet on Monday nights. We've been doing it for the last year and a half.
And we had just finished a 40-day fast.
We had just finished a 40-day fast. It was mid-April, and we were starting a study on John chapter 13 through 17.
Yeah.
Those chapters. And this particular night, we dove into John chapter 13. And for anyone who knows that chapter, a big portion of it is about Jesus is talking about the pruning of the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we go through this study, great study, like a lot of our studies are. But we kind of get to the end, and someone asked me, they were like, Nathan, do you mind just closing us out in prayer and just praying into this kind of thing that we've been studying? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I began to pray, and it turns into one of those.
The waterworks began to happen.
And, the next thing I know, like, I'm really feeling the Lord. I'm weeping, asking the Lord, just begin to, I'm asking him, Lord, would you prune my life? Would you remove anything that maybe that was even good in the past season and fruitful in the past season, but you don't necessarily want me to carry it into the next season in the same way? Because that's what we talked about. We talked about what does it mean to be pruned? And that was one of the definitions that we looked at. Maybe stuff that's beneficial in the past season.
Right.
But, and yet it's not going to be fruitful in the next one. And so
you have to remove it to let you actually grow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so
if you remember that night, what do you remember kind of what was getting you, why you got so emotional praying that prayer?
Well, I remember feeling like I sort of opened my eyes at the end of it. And I'm like crying, and I kind of realize, oh man, like I'm actually about to get pruned.
Whoa.
And I think it was like that subconscious and what became a conscious realization pretty quickly. Yeah. It's like, actually, I'm not just, my heart isn't really like being touched just in a vacuum or out of nowhere. I've heard, I think it was Corey Russell that talks about pay attention to your tears.
Yes. Oh, and, I love that.
Let them be indicators to what the Lord is emphasizing in your life and on your heart.
Tears is probably the number one way that I see or experience a manifestation of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, wow.
So when you cry, I love that. Pay attention. Like the Lord is doing something. We don't just flippantly cry when we're praying.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess I've been around the block enough. Not, I'm only 24, but I've been around the block enough to realize, okay, this is significant.
It was a big prayer.
It was a big prayer.
Okay.
And it was one of those where it's just like, I don't know if I necessarily even know what I was just asking for.
Right. Right.
And so, and I was right, because over the next few weeks, things really begin to shift around in my life. And
right.
It looked like a few different things. It looked different relationships began to shift around. My roommate who I had lived with for the previous year. His name's Caleb, and he's actually the producer of the podcast.
Shout out to Caleb.
And he's the one who made that nice little intro song, if you guys like.
Newlywed.
He's a newlywed.
I think the last podcast I was in, we shouted out to him. He was just about to get married.
to get married.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, after that time in the middle of April, that was another thing. He was about to get married. So I'm like having to think about, okay, he's going to move out of the apartment. Do I need to bring in new roommates? Do I need to, my relationship with him is transitioning. He's going to be transitioning into marriage. He's no longer going to be my roommate. We're still obviously going to be best friends, of course. But it's going to look different.
Yeah.
And so there's a transition happening there and a few other things to where, man, I'm just like, man, my life is like, things are shifting around. And I began to talk with different leaders of mine in my life and kind of sharing with them what is kind of going on. And it was weird how the different people I talked to, they all kind of unanimously thought it would be a good idea to sort of take a break during the month of June.
Yeah.
Why don't you step off your ministry teams for those 4 weeks, and why don't you just take a step back and pursue the Lord for just kind of vision and clarity of what this is unto.
Yeah.
Go visit some friends. I had kind of set up a living situation that with a couple of guys, but it wasn't going to be until the beginning of July.
Right.
And I had to move out at the end of May. So it left this whole month of June where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I don't even have a place to live.
Yeah.
and so all at the same time, I basically am just kind of almost against my will, mobile.
Being pushed out of the nest.
Yes. To where I'm like, man, I guess I'm going to take a break from my worship team, from Exodus Cry, from the Monday night friendship group, Bible study. And
from your hours in the prayer room.
From my hours in the prayer room. And I'm going to go visit some people. And I'm not going to be in Kansas City for the whole month, except I was for 2 days. I stopped in for birthday parties, which one of them was yours.
One of them was mine. It was a great one.
Absolutely.
Just a second. I love that you are seeking godly counsel from men that are older than you. You have the leaders in your life to where you're picking up that something is going on in your heart. You had this emotional response, and then things seem to just be shifting in your life. And the fact that you had people to go and talk to, that you trust their leadership and have been proven through the years as wise counsel, and they all agreed, that is something significant as well. Absolutely. So these are all, we'll kind of get into it a little bit more, but we're going to talk about like, how do you know when the Lord is leading you, when the Lord is speaking to you about a big change or a big move? Yes. All of these are really big indicators that I think need to be taken into consideration.
That's huge because I don't think it was, I think in some of my earlier years that wouldn't have been as important to me.
Right.
However, as I've just grown in maturity, grown in gained a little bit of wisdom in my young adulthood, I've realized how important it is to have leadership in your life and have older, wiser men and women. And, the leader of my Exodus Cry team and my worship team is a woman. It's actually the same person. Yeah. Stephanie Evans, if you're listening to this.
Yes. Shout out to Steph.
But yeah, it was unusual for how unanimous these different people were who I was talking to, who thought it was just a good idea. Right. And it felt so easy. And that was a big indicator, because if one of them was like, no, I think you need to stay here and do the worship team, I value the leadership in my life so much that I probably would have.
Exactly.
And I would have tried to find a way for that to work. And so I felt a lot of freedom because of different indicators from the Lord, different things shifting around in my life, and then my leaders too. Yeah. So next thing I know, Caleb gets married about May 21st or so, May 23rd, I forgot what it was. And then I had about a week to get moved out of the apartment. Uh-huh. And I get moved out, and it's like I have to leave. I leave the apartment and I head towards Oklahoma, which I kind of mapped out my entire month of June. I needed some sort of structure.
You needed place to physically sleep.
Yes, exactly. And so I had to have like stuff lined up for each day. Okay,
Right.
where's my bed gonna be?
Yeah.
And that, that was interesting because I realized sometimes I forget how many friends I have and how
Yeah.
connected I am with different people in different states and cities. I'm super blessed in that
Yeah.
way. I had so many people tell me like, man, you have so many friends. And I forget sometimes how blessed I am in that way to have different people where I can travel from city to city to city.
Right.
And have people like that. It's mostly in the Midwest.
Right.
And there's like some, like one or two on the coast, but so it's not everywhere.
Right.
But I guess it helps living in the Midwest for 24 years and being a missionary.
Exactly.
So anyways, I take off from Kansas City. This is like the first day in June.
Okay.
My plan is to stay 2 days in Oklahoma, and then I'll go down to Dallas. Well, I go to Oklahoma, and the first day that I was going to stay in Dallas, my rooming situation falls through.
Oh no.
Which I have to stay in Oklahoma an extra day, and I end up going to a city. Well, it's hard to call it a city because it's such a small town. I ended up going to a town in Oklahoma
Right.
that I wasn't planning on going to originally. It was spontaneous. I had an extra 24 hours.
Okay.
And I was like, I guess I'll go a little further into Oklahoma and go see some friends of mine that I hardly ever get to see. Well, these friends of mine, their last name is the Dunfords.
Okay.
And they got the husband and wife is named Lorenzo and Jennifer. They've been family friends of ours for years and college friends with my parents back in the day.
Yeah.
Well, they've got 13 biological children.
Wow.
By the way.
Big family.
I think 4 of them don't live at home anymore, but still leaves 9. All right.
That is insane.
A lot of mouths to fill. And but anyways, they're just one of those families where I could stop in pretty spontaneously and it was no big deal. And so I get there. Lorenzo, the father, he works a lot. I mean, it makes sense because there's a lot of mouths to feed, of course.
Right.
And so it was like, the only time I got to actually see Lorenzo was I got to meet up with him on his lunch break.
Okay. Okay.
And I hope you guys are just like buckled up for this story because we really are about to go on a roller coaster of a story.
Yes.
And this is the purpose of this podcast.
So it's going to be in depth and detailed.
It's going to be in depth. It's going to be detailed. We should just say that. Anyways.
Yeah.
So I sit down with Lorenzo for lunch, and it's just good to see him, catching up a little bit. We're eating, and all of a sudden, he tells me, he goes, Nathan, I'm getting a prophetic word for you. He goes,
Out of the blue.
Out of the blue. He goes, you should probably get your phone out. You should probably write this down.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, okay. So I get my phone out, and he goes, it's going to be a rhyming word. So it might sound a little bit silly, but don't worry. And I'm like, okay. He goes, here's the word. I feel like the Lord is saying, make room in June because you'll fly in July. And I'm just writing it out, make room in June. You'll fly in July. I'm like, wow, okay. That's funny.
Interesting.
I'm like, that's interesting.
Okay.
And, I'm thinking about the last couple of weeks. I'm like, man, I feel like, he doesn't really know what's going on with me or anything. I'm just kind of stopped through. But I'm like, man, this is interesting. He goes, you know what? I think you're going to run into a few people over the next couple of weeks that are really going to bring a lot of confirmation and clarity to what I just spoke to you about.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right. So I leave Oklahoma and I drive down to Dallas. Well, I have friends in about 3 different church Christian communities down in Dallas.
Okay.
I have friends in the prayer room community, which is in Arlington, Texas, in the Dallas area. I have friends in the upper room community, which the prayer room and the upper room are 2 different things. Mm-hmm. The prayer room is kind of like IHOP. It's a prayer room. They do, prayer meetings around the clock. The upper room is a church with prayer meetings.
Yes.
Which is different.
Different feel. Very different feel.
Very different feel. And, I don't know if anyone knows maybe the song, This Is How I Fight My Battles.
Yeah.
That song came out of the upper room and so maybe some others that you would know. But then I also have friends in a church community called Watermark Church, and that's kind of where my friend Connor, that's his home church, and I have friends in that community, and that's very congruent and similar to the Kanakuk community. They're very like-minded in that way. So I go down there and I'm thinking, I'm driving down to Dallas and I'm like, well, I want to go to a prayer meeting. Should I go to the prayer room or should I go to the upper room? Because they both have prayer meetings. And I was like, I'll go to the upper room today. I'll go to the prayer room tomorrow.
Right.
And so I go to the upper room. I walk into the sanctuary. I sit down. I'm there for 5 minutes. Okay. And walks in to the sanctuary a woman. I think she's a mom. I don't know how old she is, 45, 50, around that age. Her name is Becky Hartman. Okay. Now let me give you a little backstory on Becky Hartman. Like I said, I need you to buckle up with me on this because this is a crazy story.
Yeah.
Becky Hartman is the mother of a girl who I liked in high school.
Okay.
I met this girl named Ashley at Kanakuk camps as right before my senior year of high school. We got done with camp, and I actually drove to Edmond, Oklahoma, where they're from, and went and visited them. And, because I liked Ashley, she liked me, whatever. And while we were there, Ashley and I kind of figured I don't know if this is going to work out.
Yeah.
But I really fell in love with her family, and her family just really fell in love with me, and we just became friends. And from that point forward, I didn't see them or anything except for a couple of times in very key moments in my life over the next few years. So that first time when I went back in high school, that was 7-8 years ago. Well, Becky, Ashley's mom, who just walked into the prayer room, she has shown up in very critical moments of my life. And let me give you 2 of them. And what I would call transition moments in my life.
Transition moments.
Transition moments. The 2 most significant transition moments.
Wow.
Okay?
Wait, the 2 most significant transition moments of your life.
Of my life, actually.
This woman showed up.
Absolutely. So let me wind the clocks back 4 years ago, just briefly. Walk with me here. I was freshly broken up from a relationship that I was engaged to be married in. I don't know how many of my listeners know that part of that story, but I won't get into it.
Story for another day.
But anyways, that I was in a relationship, was going to be married, ended up breaking up. That relationship was, had ended. And I call that summer, I basically cried that whole summer. Okay. It was very difficult. It was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
The summer of 2017. Well, I was, if you know my story at all, I came to IHOP that fall, the summer of 2017. So it was kind of those couple months right before that transition period. Right. I was working at Kanakuk. I was the president of Kanakuk's, his grandkids' babysitter.
Oh my gosh.
For that last portion that I ever worked at Kanakuk. I don't know how many people know that. But man, so many stories we could get into, but we won't. And Becky Hartman, which is the girl who just walked in the upper room prayer room, she was passing through town, and I ended up meeting up for lunch with her. This is 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I sit down with her, and she could tell I was just a sad puppy.
Yeah.
Okay. And she, she ended up praying for me and prophesying over me during that lunch, and she ended up giving me a book that was very significant to me at that time. And it was such an amazing interaction that I had with her that really shifted me into this place of being confident in the Lord's leadership over my life again, and getting me excited for what was to come. And it was right after that I transitioned to Kansas City and to IHOP. Well, fast forward 2 years later, this is the summer of 2019, I went through another significant breakup, and my life transitioned within Kansas City. A lot of my friends transitioned.
Yeah.
I decided to not come back to IHOP U for that year. I took an entire year off of IHOP U. And my life just looked very different on the other side of this breakup that I had. I did a lot of healing, but right before all that happened, Becky Hartman visits IHOP for the first time. She's driving to Kansas City. She knew that I lived here, but she didn't reach out to me. She felt like the Lord told her not to reach out to me, but that she would run into me while she was here.
Oh, wow.
Okay, you're thinking maybe she'll run into me at the prayer room or something like that. She ran into me at a Target in Kansas City at 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
Okay. And I mean, I'm like, what in the world are you doing here? I can't believe this. And she ends up praying and prophesying over me outside of the Target. Yeah. And it was a powerful little interaction that we had. And then it was a couple weeks later that my life really transitioned and things shifted within Kansas City.
Yeah.
And so
there's the backstory of Becky.
Becky, that's the significance of Becky. Fast forward to this current moment where it's day 1 of June. I just came down to Dallas. I'm in the upper room prayer room. All of a sudden she walks in.
Wow.
Catherine, I've been asking the Lord, okay, I feel like I'm in some sort of transition, but how big is it?
Yeah.
Lord, like, what is it? What is this like? Because, what is this going to be like? How big is it? Is it a different city? Is it different ministry emphasis? Is it different apartment? Give me clarity. The fact that she just walked into the room, my eyebrows just go straight up. And I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this just went to the next level. All right.
Wow.
So she walks in with a friend. And her friend was kind of pacing in the back. I go over to her friend. I go, hey, are you here with Becky? She goes, yeah. I said, man, this is crazy because Becky's always showing up in my life in these weird moments.
Right.
And her friend looks up to me and she goes, oh my gosh, you must be Nathan.
What?
I go, wait, what? How do you know my name? And she goes, oh yeah. As we were driving down to Dallas from Edmond, Oklahoma, the Lord put it on Becky's heart that she was going to run into you today. And she told me the story.
Whoa.
Of how she ran into you at Target 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm like, what?
So as they were driving, the Lord lays it on Becky's heart. She's going to run into you.
That's right.
But has no idea that you're in Dallas.
Has no idea. I don't live in Dallas.
Right.
She doesn't live in Dallas. Okay.
Oh, wow.
She lives 3.5 hours north of Dallas in Edmond, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And she goes, oh, by the way, my name's Cindy Conant. Okay.
Ooh.
And for anyone who follows worship leaders or anything in the charismatic movement, they know that Cindy Conant, who I'm speaking to in the moment, is Lindy Conant's mother.
Yeah.
And Lindy Conant travels around. She came out of Circuit Rider. She travels around with Andy Bird.
The Send.
She travels around with Lou Engle. Perhaps you've heard some of her stuff.
Amazing worship leader.
Absolutely. She was just here this past weekend, actually, here in IHOP. Leading worship. And so, but I'm like, oh my gosh, Lindy Conant's mom, this is crazy. So Cindy goes, let me go get Becky. She goes and gets Becky. Becky turns around and sees me and just about falls down.
I'm sure.
We're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. So we step out of the prayer room area and we sit down on the couch and I'm like, what are you doing here? She goes, Nathan, I've never been to Upper Room before.
Wow.
She goes, the Lord just put it on my heart to come down here. We are just coming down for a couple of prayer meetings today. We got to go back today.
One day trip.
Little day trip.
Wow.
She goes, while we're driving down here, I felt like the Lord told me that I was going to run into you. Yeah. And I was like, this is crazy. Like I wasn't even I was supposed to come down to Dallas a day earlier, but my housing for that day fell through and I had to stay in Oklahoma an extra day. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So we're obviously in a divine appointment.
Yes.
Okay. Next thing I know, Alyssa Smith comes walking by. Maybe some of you guys know Alyssa Smith is sort of she's a worship leader down at Upper Room. She's kind of the face of Upper Room worship. She's like the Laura Hackett of of IHOP KC or the Jen Johnson of Bethel.
Yeah.
And where she's their main person, their main worship leader. And she's the one who, sings that song, This Is How I Fight My Battles. She comes walking by. Cindy is like, hey, Alyssa, come on over here. She goes, yeah, we're in a divine appointment with this young man named Nathan. We're about to pray and prophesy over him. You got to get in on this.
And what are you thinking?
I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, this is insane. I've been listening to Meetingyssa Smith stuff for years now. She's one of my favorites.
Right.
And, usually I would be like, this is a big deal, except she's not even the divine appointment one.
It's Becky.
She wasn't the one sent 3.5 hours south to meet me. She's like getting in on this. This is like the cherry on top.
Wow.
So anyways, they begin to pray and prophesy over me, and this weighty presence of the Lord just comes on me. I try to tell people like to sort of like, what does that mean, that weighty presence? I'm thinking of like a weighted blanket.
Yes.
You put a little weighted blanket on, you can feel like it's like a type of thing that's like on you, and it's like, whoa, the presence of God is this tangible, weighty thing that's on me, and I just feel him as they're praying for me and getting different words. And Cindy had a word for me. She felt like I was about to be uprooted and to be planted in a new place. And Alyssa, had a word for me about she felt like I was going to really need to trust the Lord's leadership in this next season, and to pull on that sort of relationship related to the Lord's trust and his leadership that I've developed over the years. I'm really going to need to pull on it for this upcoming season. So it's like a crazy interaction, and I'm just shook by the end of it. I'm like, man, this is insane. So I get done. It was about 30, 40 minutes of this little moment. By the time I get done, finally Connor shows up to the prayer meeting. Okay, he was supposed to show up. All right, he was. Who knows what he was doing? Fashionably late, but it worked out. Of
course, always.
It worked out because I was having this moment. He gets here not too long after he gets there. We go out to lunch, and I like tell him the whole story. I'm like, man, you got to hear about everything that just happened. He goes, man, this is crazy. He goes, and this is, like I said 2 or 3 times already, I know this story is kind of crazy. We're pulling out prophetic words. We're going to pull out some dreams here in a second.
Yeah.
I have really found myself in a significant prophetic swirl, is kind of what I call it.
Yeah.
And so this is, it's very unusual, the things that I'm sharing. And I'm not even going to share all of the stuff.
Right.
I'm just kind of sharing the stuff, that's maybe the most prominent, or that I would want to share. There's some that's really personal and I probably won't share. But I am sharing this story with.
And
what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think it's important also for people to hear stories like this, because you'll hear maybe some big speakers or big people talk about, oh, it was a crazy story how I ended up here, there, but you don't actually get the details unless you're willing to sit down and hear their 30-minute story. Absolutely. Or whatever, however long it ends up being. So that's also why we wanted to share it so in depth together, is like actually going into the details so that people can hear a story like this and be like, wow, God really does set things up that significantly. Wow, he really does bring someone 3 hours that exact day and delay my trip a day so that I can run into her at that exact place. Like, God is sovereign. We have free will. It's like all the different parts that are moving, but there really are moments like this that happen. And when they do, you have to pay attention to them. And
absolutely, because they don't happen every day.
They don't happen every day.
It's very unusual how much activity we're kind of talking about right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting down with Connor. I tell him the whole story, everything I just told you, basically. He goes, man, this is crazy. He goes, the pastor of my church, which is Watermark Church, it's a mega church down in Dallas. He goes, the pastor of my church, his name's Todd Wagner. He's been the pastor at Watermark for the last decade or so. I think 10 or 15 years. I don't know the exact number. But as of just a few weeks ago, he's no longer the pastor there. Well, when he tells me this, all of a sudden comes flooding to my mind a dream that I had in 2018.
Wow.
It was the summer 2018. It was right after we got back from Russia.
Okay.
And I went to a conference, a Louisville conference in Colorado, and I had this dream. I always thought it was significant. Never been able to make complete sense out of it. here's the dream. And in the spirit of Dream Boy podcast, we'll share the dream.
Got to.
This was actually the same conference where I got a prophetic word that my dream life was about to explode. And it has a lot to do with why I call my podcast what I do. But anyways, in the dream that I had summer of 2018, I was in a church building in sort of like a Bible study type meeting that was being led by Connor's pastor, Todd Wagner. In the dream, the clock strikes the top of the hour.
Okay.
Todd Wagner addresses the room. He goes, "My time here is finished." Mm-hmm. He begins to pack up all of his stuff and begins to walk out of the church. I follow him out of the church. He comes to the front of the church building, gets into his car, and leaves, leaving me right there in the front of the church building. I watch him pull off in his car. I'm like, man, that's crazy. He just left. Next thing I know, another car pulls up kind of where Todd Wagner's car just left. And in this car is Todd White.
Okay.
Todd Wagner, Todd White. Todd Wagner leaves in his car.
Big people to show up in your dream,
That's right.
honestly.
A little play on words. Both two Todds.
Right.
Todd White shows up in his car. I look over. I wave at Todd White. He waves at me. He gets out of his car and goes into the church building that we just came out of. Then I get into my car. My twin brother and sister show up in the back seat, and then I drive to Connor's house. Okay, that's the dream that I had 3 years ago.
Okay.
I knew when I had it, it was significant. Never been able to make sense of it completely. I thought maybe I've had some symbolic stuff, but
yeah. Like, what does Todd White symbolize to me?
What does Todd Wagner mean to me? All of a sudden, this dream is way more relevant than it's ever been, literally.
Right.
Because Todd Wagner, for the first time in my knowledge of him, is not the church or not the pastor at his church, and he's got a big influence, mega church down there.
Yeah.
Okay, or at least he has over the last decade. As he's telling me this, I'm seeing on Instagram that Todd White, I follow him on Instagram, he's been making posts up, and his ministry has been making posts. Everybody tune in to our Sunday service this upcoming Sunday because we got a big announcement.
Big announcement.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? The big announcement came on June 20th or June 21st, I think. So I know what it is now.
Right.
But at the time, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to look to that date and find out what happened. I tuned in that day. He makes this announcement that him and another, his ministry, his church, is combining with another ministry and church in Dallas to become one church and one ministry. And he goes, I've been traveling, Todd White saying this, I've been traveling the last decade a lot. He goes, I feel like the Lord is saying he wants me to zone in more on the region of Dallas and to stay more planted over the next coming years. Wow. So I'm thinking in my dream, this is lining up where it's like Todd White or Todd Wagner is sort of stepping out of the church influence, if you will, in Dallas, at least for a time period. And Todd White is saying, I'm actually going to be focused in on the church in Dallas in an increased way. And so if anything is clear about this dream, there's a timing indicator.
With a literal clock.
A literal clock in the dream. The clock strikes. It's like, if you know anything about interpreting dreams, you see something like that, that's saying, listen, when these sort of things happen, it's a timing indicator. Yeah. Right? Of other things. And so the shift that's happening with Todd Wagner, Todd White, is a timing indicator to movement with me.
Right.
I get into my car.
To get in your car.
And drive to Connor's house.
Exactly.
Which has always been in Dallas.
Always.
Always. And I think there's more significance to all of that, but I don't want to get into all of my breakdown of what I believe that dynamic involves.
So you're realizing in one day, you see Becky.
Yep.
This is huge and possibly transitional time in my life.
Yep.
And then the Lord brings out of natural conversation with Connor a memory of a dream to mind about you moving to Dallas.
Yes.
And everything is lining up in the natural exactly how it was in your dream.
Absolutely.
2 years ago.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
And so, man, I'm like, this is crazy. Well, a couple days go by. I'm processing all this out with my dad.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. I'm trying not to just like, it may be at different times in my life I would really like make big. I've used the prophetic to make decisions. I've used words and used dreams, and I think some of that's good, but I think you want to have an abundance of counsel and wisdom in your life to be able to process through some of this stuff, especially as young men and young women who we're navigating through some of this maybe for, the first time or one of the first times. And it's so key to have older men and women in your life who have been doing this for decades.
Yes.
To be able to help you process through this type of stuff. And so I'm beginning to process with different men and women in my life. Well, I go to a church service on Sunday night at Upper Room with Connor. And it was during that Sunday night service that a man by the name of Brian Barcelona is preaching. And little backstory on him, he's had a young adult, not young adults, high school type ministry that he's been doing out in Los Angeles, where he has been going into high schools, trying to get the gospel to people, to different kids in high schools. Well, he got invited by the pastor of Upper Room to relocate from Los Angeles to Dallas.
Okay.
And so he did that in just the last few months. He relocated his family and his ministry to Dallas. Now they're a part of the Upper Room church community, but he's still doing his ministry to young adults. So he's preaching that night, and he is sharing just awesome testimonies of how they've reached young people. While I'm listening, the Lord begins to put on my heart to donate 500 copies of my book, Jesus is Better Than Porn, to Brian Barcelona and his student ministries.
Wow.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I can really tell this is on my heart. Man, like I don't even know Brian Barcelona. I've never talked to him. He doesn't know me.
Right.
Why is he going to want some of my books, of a person he doesn't even know? Anyways, the service is kind of coming to a close, and I go up to Brian and I go, listen, man, I've been in Kansas City. My name's Nathan. I've been a missionary the last 4 years with IHOP up in Kansas City. I come out of addiction. I wrote a book about it, trying to give him the spark notes. And I'm like, I know you don't know me, but I felt like the Lord put it on my heart to tell you I'd like to donate 500 copies of my book to your ministry if you want them.
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, like, if he doesn't want them, I'm off the hook.
Sure.
I'm off the hook. No big deal. But I'm trying to be obedient, of course. I tell him, he goes, wow, man, this is awesome. He goes, we got a database of thousands of kids, even with their addresses. He goes, we'll literally ship out as many books as we can to these high school kids. I'm like, wow, okay, you want the books. And he's like, dude, here, take down my number.
Wow.
Send me a copy of your book. Let me have a look at it, and we'll be in touch. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Okay.
I guess this is happening.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of afterwards, I kind of do the math, and because I'm the author of the book, I can get the books for a really discounted price. It's going to cost me about $1,200 to get the 500 copies.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, even if anyone's listening to this right now, I haven't raised all the money for that specific project. And if the Lord's putting it on your heart to sow into that specific project, I definitely want you to reach out to me. Whether it's email, phone call, text message, anything like that.
Yeah.
But, and so, I walk away from that interaction. I'm thinking about it in my head, and I'm like, Lord, what was that? What is this all about? And I felt like the Lord kind of put on my heart this imagery of back in the day, whenever there was, people would travel to go visit kings. They would oftentimes, kings and queens, they would bring gifts. And the gifts would be unto relationship. And I felt like the Lord kind of gave me this, that idea. He was like, this is what that is. It's sort of this gift or this donation of what you have is going to be unto relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know what all that's going to look like. I don't know if that's going to lead to something greater. I can see it leading to something greater. And I feel like that was what the Lord showed me. But so that's what the Lord showed me. And so I was like, man, this is pretty cool.
And he is relocating to Dallas, or is in Dallas.
He already did. Brian
he already
has.
is there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're seeing what the Lord was doing as like, this is another reason possibly, or another push that you're going to have relationships very important in Dallas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was right after this that, like I said, I had my whole month scheduled out. I ended up flying out to LA right after that to go visit some friends. And it was in LA that I began to sort of come into agreement with what I felt like the Lord was doing. Because even with all this stuff, I'm like, I don't want to be too quick to jump the gun on some of this stuff. But I just start feeling like this confidence that I'm pretty sure the Lord is moving me to Dallas specifically to be a part of the Upper Room community. Yeah. The Upper Room church community. Don't have all the vision for what it's going to look like yet, but I got these little bits and pieces. But I'm thinking to myself, man, like I got a couple of guys back in Kansas City who we were planning on getting a place together at the beginning of July. Yeah. I'm processing with my dad. I'm like, what should I do? Like, I don't want to screw these guys, but you know, I don't have my plan all put together, but I feel like this is where things are headed. Yeah. I feel like I got to get them something, like they got to know about what's going on. And basically end up deciding I have to communicate to them, share with them some of what has been happening, and be like, guys, I don't think I can move forward with what we were looking to do and getting a place. And I'm like, man, I'm sorry. Yeah. But all this stuff is changing, and
it's a big deal because that was your kind of security of, yes, when I move back to Kansas City, I have a place to live with these friends. Like this is what I've set up. So the fact that you are calling them, telling them that actually that's not going to work out, that is you stepping out in faith and trusting that the Lord is actually doing this, and it's worth like taking that step of faith and giving up the plans that you had set to stay in Kansas City.
Yes.
It was a step of faith for sure.
100%. And yeah, exactly, because where the heck am I going to live if everything falls through? Right. And so that was a big step for me. I kind of told him, listen, I think I'm going to pass on this opportunity. And so that's when I started. It was almost like I began to burn my bridges a little bit. Yeah. And it was kind of, I felt like it was my way of starting to come into agreement with what I felt like the Lord was doing. And be like, okay, Lord, I'm taking this stuff seriously.
Yeah. I'm saying yes to what you're leading me to do. Now you're going to have to come through because I don't have any other option. Exactly. Yeah.
And so over the next course, the course of the next couple weeks, I'm processing this stuff out, and I began to get random other words, like, someone will just come up to me and who I've never spoken with before, and they're just like, I see you as a rocket, and I feel like the Lord's about to launch you out. I'm like, holy smokes. Yeah. Oh my gosh, they have no idea what's going on in my life. Right. And so anyways, there's plenty more I could share of this story, a lot more details. But I think I've sort of shared the big bulk of the story. And so all that being said, I'm moving to Dallas. Okay. And okay, I'll say this last part. I came back to Dallas. I flew back from LA into Dallas for just one day, and I met with my friend Brad Stroup, and he's the leader of the House of Prayer down in Dallas. Yeah. And I just kind of shared with him a lot of what I just shared with you guys. And I'm like, man, what do you think about all this stuff? This is what I'm talking about. I'm sharing it with older and wiser guys. Yeah. And he goes, man, it sounds like you're going to fly in July. I'm like, wow. Like you
brought it back.
You brought it back. I'm like, you take that word seriously. And that, and he's like, yeah. And I was like, man, if I'm really transitioning, I want to go back to Kansas City and transition well. And, cause I'm on worship teams, I'm on ministry teams, and and I'm like, I want to take the rest of the summer and transition well. And he goes, yeah, I don't know. He goes, maybe. He goes, you might be out of there quicker than you think. And I'm like, okay. And so,
but that would take the Lord too, because I know your heart.
Absolutely.
You're not just going to step away from your responsibilities without, seeing them through and transitioning well.
Absolutely.
So it would take the Lord for you to fly in July.
Yes.
Like it actually would take the Lord.
absolutely.
Convincing your leaders, having people step up to take the role that you've been doing.
Yes.
Different things that are out of your control.
Yep.
And if it ends up happening in July, like
Yeah.
that's the Lord. That
It
would
is.
only take the Lord.
Absolutely. Because, I'm thinking about it. I wasn't planning on going anywhere
Right.
at the beginning of this month, or I wasn't planning on leaving Kansas City. I was trying to get a new apartment. I knew that.
Yeah.
But all this stuff I didn't conjure up in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. And it would be silly for me to sort of step in at this point and be like, okay, Lord, I can take it from here. Because I actually can't take it from here either.
Right.
He's going to have to bring the details together. And I'm trying to position myself, I'm having conversations with my leaders, and I'm keeping them up to date, and I'm kind of, like I said, I spent the whole month of June making room.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of trying to get my ducks in a row to be able to move, because I think that's, I believe that's what the Lord's moving things towards. However, I don't know where, I don't have a place to live yet.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm starting to get vision and language for what I believe it's unto. And maybe I'll talk about that later. But I'm going to need him to continue to bring it together, especially if it's going to be in July.
Yeah.
And so I'm anticipating a July move. If I get to the end of July, and I'm still in Kansas City, I don't think it's not going to mess with me that much.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be a conversation with him, like, okay, what was the fly in July type of thing?
Right.
Of course. But I think I'll still continue to position myself and do everything that I know how to do. But whenever he makes it clear that it's time to go,
Yeah.
I want to be ready.
For sure. And it's like working together with the Lord. It's partnership with him, where you're doing the things that you can do to talk to people down in Dallas, maybe find a room. Like you're putting your feelers out there. You're not just like expecting the Lord to drop it into your lap out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
But in the process of figuring it out and taking those steps of faith, the Lord is directing you and like leading you. I know at IHOP you have told me that something really stuck out to you was that it's easier to turn a moving car than one that is just parked.
Yeah.
So maybe like explain that a little bit, because I feel like that's what you're doing right now.
Yeah, it's like, well, think that analogy, if you're just sitting in a car and it's not moving, if you try to turn the wheel, it's harder.
Yeah.
And the tires don't move as well.
Exactly.
You're just like, ah! But if you're moving forward and then you turn, then it's really easy to kind of turn the car.
Yeah.
And so that analogy that I use when talking about walking with the Lord, sometimes it's best to sort of begin to move forward in what you think he's doing, even before you have all the pieces together.
Yeah.
And you're like, I think he's moving me in this direction. And if he has something different for you, at least you're moving forward.
Yeah.
And it's easy for him to adjust the wheel.
Yes. As
you're moving. And I think maybe there will be some of that. Here's another thing. Well, I just want to say this too.
Yeah.
Here's what I want to do for this podcast episode, because we were going to try to fit both of our kind of announcements in one episode. What if we do part 1 and part 2?
I love it.
Does that make sense?
Let's do that.
Okay. So we'll just spend the rest of this one, because we've been going, like 50 minutes.
Okay. Wow.
So this is a whole episode.
Yeah. It should be part 1 and part 2.
It probably should
sure.
be. Yeah. I want to give you your whole episode. So we'll just keep diving into this one and get it all out. Anyways, I think it'll be interesting, because we're sharing this story. I'm sharing this story, but I'm right in the midst of it.
Exactly.
I'm right in the thick of the storyline. I'm not sharing it from a place of I'm already been moved to Dallas.
Right. You already knew how all the pieces landed.
Yeah, and that is a vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
Because guys, what if I get to the end of this month, I'm still in Kansas City? What if I get to the end of August? It's the end of the summer, and I'm still in Kansas City.
I wonder what that is like. Well, being a little tongue-in-cheek, because I do know what that is like.
Anyone who knows what it's like, it's you.
Right.
And we're going to dive into that in the, part 2. So make sure you tune into part 2.
But it's okay to be where you're at and to say things that the Lord is leading you to do and say, even if down the road it's like, yeah, it didn't work out exactly how I understood that it was going to. Like, you are in process, and it's okay to be in process with this stuff, because we don't hear perfectly. We don't see perfectly.
That's right.
We hear and see in part, like a mirror dimly lit, Yes. So it's like, it actually is okay to be open and vulnerable in the process and understand that the Lord will make those adjustments as you're following him.
Absolutely. I think that's key. And I think there's something kind of cool about being able to listen to somebody's story where it hasn't all come together. It's not all polished up yet.
Right.
Because, I mean, this is very authentic and very like real life. And you're kind of getting to see how I'm processing through it and how, what it looks like practically for me to value the prophetic in my life, to value dreams, to value the leadership that's in my life, to value the personal rhema word, of the Lord to me. And you're kind of getting to see how I do my relationship with him. And so, if anything, I hope that's encouraging for you guys just to see that. And man, I have no doubt that things are going to work out in different ways that I wasn't expecting.
For sure.
I think that I've walked with the Lord enough to know that's going to be the case. I think there will be some things that will be right on as he's showing me. And then there's going to be some things where I was not expecting it to go that way.
Yeah.
And because you're right, as we're navigating through it, we don't hear perfectly. And we're doing our best. That's why it's best to do it in community. In community with godly counsel, looking at all the things in our life that the Lord is doing, not just only listening to one way that God speaks. Like, I think hearing God's voice, we talk about the rhema word. What does that mean? That's the word for the moment. It's not the written word. It's the word God is speaking directly to you. Can be through the living word, or through the written word. I'm getting confused. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I know what you're saying. But like, that can be confusing for people. It's like, how do you hear from God? How do you actually know he's talking to you? How do you actually know that that's him and not just you making it up? And I think it's what you're explaining is there was many things in many areas of your life that all were lining up to the similar thing. And there was those prophetic moments, the divine appointments, the direction of leaders, your prayer life, your emotions, it's like all the different things in your life all pointing in the same direction. Going back to the tears. Exactly. That started this whole story. Pay attention to your tears. Yep. So, yeah. And then coupling that with so much of it is stepping out in faith. Right. Like, I don't know 100%. Yeah. And that is part of walking with Jesus through all of this, is it does take faith, and it does, who knows what it's going to look like. I might end up, I've heard of people moving to entire different cities without a place to stay, and when they show up, someone says, hey, I just feel like I'm supposed to offer you this place to stay. Or and I have a personal friends where that's happened to. I'm thinking about Brother Ellis. Oh my goodness. If anyone knows Kyle Ellis, that happened to him whenever he moved to Kansas City. Wow. To join IHOP U. Shout out to Brother Ellis if he's listening to this podcast. We miss you, Kyle. We miss him. And so, yeah, and it's, part of it too is part of that stepping out and stepping out in faith. Sometimes that takes you laying down your dignity a little bit. you're risking looking like a fool.
Not having a fallback plan.
Yeah.
It's
it can be
one.
scary.
Yeah.
And, thankfully, I think back to the word that Alyssa Smith gave me when I was being prayed and prophesied over at the upper room. She said, you're going to need to pull from the trust that you've built with the Lord over the last years. You're going to need to pull from that in this current season. And so I'm thankful that, this isn't my first time sort of stepping out in faith.
Yeah.
And so it is easier than it, maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago. But it's still scary and it's still risky. And there's still that dynamic of what if I do all this and relocate and it all falls through. And I look like a dummy, and I'm putting it out there and making a podcast about it and all with that risk. Yeah. So. And
I think we'll get more into it, but it's like there actually is no guarantee. Just because you're putting it out there in faith doesn't mean the Lord's like, oh, well, now I have to do it.
Yeah.
Like, you actually can't strong arm God to do anything.
And that's not what this is.
No. I'm not saying it is, but it's just like, there is no guarantee. There is real risk when you follow the Lord.
That's right.
But he is good. And it may not always turn out the way you think. Yeah. But it actually is always going to be good. And because that's his nature.
That's right. That's the confidence that we do have.
Yes.
Is that he's with us. He is the leader of my life.
Yeah.
And that he's good.
Yeah.
So those things give us that confidence.
And that doesn't come out of him doing exactly what we understood that he said he would do.
Yep.
That comes from reading the word, reading the Bible, and knowing his character, actually getting to know him. And then living life, going through different seasons where he does exactly what you thought he would and he came through. Or it doesn't turn out like how you thought it would and you're questioning it all. Like learning to know his goodness through all of those things.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that might be a great place to sort of transition.
Right. Okay.
So like I said, because this is a long story, and I think it should be, a whole episode should be given to this story. And I want our whole episode to be given to yours. So you heard my big announcement. Yes. I'm moving to Dallas. You got to hear a lot of the story, the prophetic swirl, if you will. Well, I want you guys to stay tuned for part 2 of this podcast, where Catherine Clark is going to make her big announcement.
My big announcement.
All right,
it's been a long time coming.
So don't go anywhere. Make sure you click on the next episode of this podcast where you'll get to hear Catherine's story. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Yes, to be continued.
To be continued. See ya.